was great. That was fantastic. Thank you. I love it. I love an upbeat tune like that. That's wonderful. All right, if our usher will come forward, we'll continue our worship with the giving of God's time. Father, we pray that you might take back the portion that you give us. Standing for our hymn, found on page 265. In the church hymn.
Yes.
11th chapter. The Gospel according to Matthew, the 11th chapter, verses 16 and 17. But whereunto shall I liken this generation? It's likened to children sitting in the markets and calling unto their fellows and saying, We have piped unto you, and you have not danced. We have mourned unto you, and you have not lamented. May the Lord add his blessing to this reading of a portion of his holy word. You may be seated. We now move another week away from Easter. If you'll recall, last week I suggested that we spend the month of April talking about the ways in which we forget Easter. You know, we are Easter people. That's what it means to be a Christian. It means to accept the resurrection of Jesus and to recognize that literal historical event of Christ's resurrection and to accept that as a meaningful part of our lives. Last week we examined the fact, however, that even that dramatic moment of the resurrection of Jesus begins to get crowded out of our minds by benefit of the temptation of materialism. Focusing in on the things of this world and becoming enamored with the insatiable desire to buy and to acquire more and more things. Today I want to talk to you about something a little different, though. I want to talk about the way of forgetting Easter, which is indifference. Indifference. Not caring. You know, I can remember back when I was in college, I had never traveled to a really big city. And to me, having grown up in Chattanooga, if you talked about the big city meant Atlanta. And so I can remember going to New York City as a college student for the first time. When I went to New York City, I rode the subway, and it was such a dramatic experience for me. But what really stood out in my mind about that event was seeing all of the people sitting on the commuter train, and no one had anything to say to one another. It struck me as so odd that even as women would come onto the train, no man would offer her a seat. It struck me as an odd way to live. Indifference. Of course, the explanation in such a crowded place with so many people and so much to do, the price for each individual to be able to interact with another is pretty high. But it struck me with the idea of indifference. There's a painting that was painted some 1 century ago, and the painting depicts the crucifixion of Jesus, and Jesus is on the cross, but the image of Jesus is off to the side so that he's no longer the center of the painting. And when you look closer, you see in the painting, you see people in the marketplace going about their daily routine. You even see children climbing over a wall to get over the wall. And Jesus is left unattended, unacknowledged, unobserved in his crucified state with no one around him. And the painting is entitled Indifference. You know, to live with indifference is to live the life where you don't emotionally invest yourself in other people. It's to develop that sense of what the Roman philosopher and Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius, who was a philosopher in his own right, he helped to develop a school of thought known as Stoicism that was based on the Latin apathe, based on building apathy, so that you don't really care what happens around you. You keep that stiff upper lip regardless of what goes on around you. It's to develop less attachment in the world and to care very little. Even one of the world's great religions, Buddhism, is committed to the idea of eliminating desire and eliminating connection. It's based on eliminating our sense of being invested in the things of this world. It is, in effect, a kind of stoicism, developing a kind of apathy. But that's not what Easter people are about. We're not about developing apathy. We're not about developing indifference. What a cold and heartless place the world becomes when we allow ourselves to surrender to indifference. I lost a good friend of mine this past week who had been a colleague of mine at Carson Newman as a faculty member, and he had been retired not too long, but I remember him telling the story about encountering indifference in his own life, how when he was drafted into the Army during the Vietnam era, that as an only child he had been looked after and doted on at his mother's table and had been the center of his family's universe, and then he got to the Army station where they were doing the physical exams. He said everyone stood in a line and no one said anything to anyone else, and as he approached the Army doctor, who scarcely looked up at any of the soldiers and didn't address any of them by their given names, cigarette dangling from his mouth, he asked my friend, "How do you feel?" And my friend said, "I feel fine." At which point he wrote down 98.6 on his clipboard. He didn't care. Indifference. What does it mean to encounter a world of indifference? Jesus warned us about such a world. He does so here in Matthew when he talks about a world where the songs are played and no one dances, where mourning occurs but no one cares. He gave us the starkest example of a world of indifference when he told us the story of the Good Samaritan. A man falls among thieves and is beaten senseless and is left in the streets to die, bleeding and helpless.